I wanted to talk to you about state power and ideological legitimacy. My friend, probably about a year ago, my friend Jack, showed me a document that had been created by one of these organizations that's a handmaiden of the Western power elite. And this organization had done its focus groups and polls to test the trust that Western citizens have in journalists, media, and government. So basically, pardon me, in the power elite themselves. And what this study did that was very interesting was that it broke up the public into two groups: the informed people and the uninformed people, or the more informed people and the less informed people. And what it found was that trust in media, governments, journalists, that this was dropping even among the informed people. So in Germany, Australia, and the United States, that kind of stuff's going down. And so we know from many political theorists and commentators have explained this to us, that governments cannot and do not, in modern societies, enforce the loyalty of their population. They have to have voluntary participation. You don't have, as Matthew Raphael Johnson says, a machine gun nest on the roof of every building operated by a government employee. Modern governments depend, and probably all governments throughout history, depend to a large degree on legitimacy and people's voluntary participation. So when you've got people in Thailand and Russia having more trust in their government than people in the United States or Germany, you've got a serious problem, particularly when the Western governments are head over heels in love with programs and policies like mass immigration, or enforcing political homosexuality and transgenderism, all of the things that their population by and large is not interested in, when those governments are head over heels in love with pushing those agendas anyway. So we got some issues here with that. Long term, they have some problems that they either need to scale this back or find a way to increase their legitimacy. And what are they doing? They're doing none of the above. The United States foreign policy establishment, despite no general support in the population, is pretending that it's the year 1990 and that they can just go to Venezuela and overthrow government, even though no one anymore believes that kind of stuff is a good idea. So the study that was done is kind of like, hey guys, you need to pay attention to your position, because our support is eroding, our legitimacy is being eroded, and we can't do all the things that we used to do. But nobody's paying attention to those studies, which is probably good for us long term, because we want these people to fail. But thinking about this led me back to another issue. It's the issue of ideology and political legitimacy. Sometimes, let's say that you're in college, or you're dealing with people from the government, you're dealing with official people who are part of the establishment, who've got money, who've got good jobs, people with authority, people in positions of authority. And they believe in a bunch of things that we know are either false, like the transgenderism and low-skill immigration. So we know that those things are either false, or they're not what they're presented to be, and that they're not going to help everybody. They're mostly going to help capitalists and activists in those two cases. Or there's an issue like, let's say, the Holocaust, in which a very specific version of the historical story has been promoted in contradiction to the facts. So I'll give you just one example so that we don't get bogged down too much in the details. Elie Wiesel said it's got to be 6 million. It has to be 6 million. And he focused on the 6 million number because of certain historical associations with the number, certain Kabbalistic associations and Talmudic associations with the number, but we're not going to get into that. He said it's got to be 6 million. Other people, like Rahil Berg, said no, that's ridiculous. There's no justification for it being 6 million. We're going to say it's 5 or 5.1, and it has to be 5.1, because if you say it's 6 million Jews and 5 million others, then you've got to have 5.1 million Jews so that the Holocaust is still a Jewish thing and not at parity with the non-Jews. Okay. So that is merely to say that there is good reason to believe, even if you only go from the official approved scholarship, that the 6 million number is a problem. It's a problem just from Rahil Berg, who everybody would recognize is the major historian of the Holocaust in the 20th century. Okay. So we've got the Holocaust stuff, the gender theory stuff, the free trade stuff, and then democracy itself and liberalism, which are probably the two biggest fish in the kettle. The theory has been that wherever liberalism goes, all political problems will be solved. Wherever democracy, which is just people voting for their representatives, basically, let's say, just mass politics and representative government, wherever liberalism and democracy go, all political problems will be solved. Now, that has also been shown not to be the case. Some societies can do democracy and liberalism, and some can't, and it actually makes things worse. So all of these are sacred cows to our Western civilization at this time, and they seem to be unjustified. But when you go into a college or you go into a government place or you're talking to people with authority, all of this stuff is just assumed. So it can feel like, you know, am I crazy? Am I wrong? Am I somehow blinded in reaching these conclusions? Everyone's against me. I can go into a library and I can see 400 books on a shelf that disagree with me. And who am I? What authority do I have? But what I wanted to put against this is the historical position of, for example, the Soviet Union. How many professors, academics, government officials, people with authority were maintaining in the Soviet Union that Marxism, Leninism was true, was correct, was valid, was just from the year 1921 up until the year, let's say, 1989. If you went to the Soviet Union and you said that Marxism, Leninism is not only factually incorrect in its assessment of the world, but it is also unjust, and it is an ideological mechanism for promoting the expropriation of the society and the creation of a clique to control, 100 million people, 200 million people, then you would look just as crazy. You would be just as isolated as someone today who's disagreeing with the gender theory stuff, the value of free trade, liberalism, democracy, or saying, hey, maybe we need to take a look at how many people died in World War II under various circumstances and reassess those death counts. So in both situations, the individual, let's say today we agree that the Soviet Union was built on false ideological premises. And as I discussed at previous times, if you look at Anthony Sutton's books about Western technological transfers to the Soviet Union, you will in fact see that the socialist state, the materialist state, the communist state, was not capable of technological innovations until it had shed enough of its original foundationary material and reverted to some sort of national Bolshevik state. So the really radical communism was totally incapable of making technological advancements, which is the exact opposite of what the theory would suggest. The theory would suggest that the more radical, the more materialist, the greater the emphasis in technological achievements would be, because that's all they care about. But that's not the case. That's not what happened. So in a very strong sense, the communist ideology was just dead wrong. And yet, for 75 years, it was the ruling ideology of the state, even though it was dead wrong. So what I'm trying to say here is, in a very roundabout way, that we are in an identical intellectual situation in which the things that we disagree with are promoted from top to bottom by a regime that is built on these as their core principles, and yet is incapable of carrying out its policies in a way that achieves its stated ends, which are to help the people in the society. So don't get discouraged. Whenever you start to get discouraged because you find yourself in this kind of situation, just remember, what about the people who disputed the Soviet Union, who called it out for what it was, who ended up shot or in a gulag? Were they right or were they wrong? Well, we know today that they were right, even though they had everybody basically in the society who was in a position of authority against them, saying that they were insane, uneducated. We would, in our society, you'd be called a hater or whatever. You'd be called a hater, a racist, or a supremacist, or something like that. But I don't think that there's any way out of this analogy or out of this comparison for the regime. The only thing that they can say is, well, we're actually right and the Soviet Union was actually wrong. I don't think they can escape from the comparison. Thank you for your time.